Are you looking out at the world today and wondering what in the world is going on? Right is wrong, wrong is right, up is down. What in the world is happening? This podcast of Redeeming Truth, we brought on a guest named Trevor Loudon, where he is going to help you understand what in the world is going on so you can make sense of our culture, and then you can make sense of how to live as a Christian in this culture. You want to make sure that you stick around for this episode of Redeeming Truth. This is Trevor Loudon. He is somebody that I've seen many of his lectures and have come to really admire, especially the movie that he was a part of called Enemies Within the Church. I've recommended it many times to you at church. If these issues have come up, I've pointed you to this video. It is something that is absolutely must watch. Trevor, thank you for joining us today. I would love for you to introduce yourself to our listeners.
Well, thanks very much, John. As you may hear from my southern accent, I am from New Zealand. I live in the United States. I'm married to an American. And my main interest, I really got into this. I'm a political conservative. I'm an anti-communist. I study radical movements and their influence on the mainstream culture. And I'm very interested in the intersection of faith and politics. I think America will not be saved without a revival. And I think a lot of the Christian church is just checked out, unfortunately. So that's where I come from. I don't believe in Marxism, socialism, wokeism, progressivism, or any of those isms. I believe in America, the Constitution, and what we have to do to save this country.
I couldn't agree more, and just saying that puts us on the battle lines against half of evangelical Christianity, at least, saying that we love America.
Unfortunately.
It absolutely is unfortunate. How did you get into studying radical movements?
Look, it started in New Zealand back in the 1980s. We're a country that was saved by Americans during World War II. My parents are alive because American sailors and soldiers and airmen and Marines stopped the Japanese at the battles of Midway and Guadalcanal in the Coral Sea. So we're very grateful to America. But in 1984, we elected a socialist Labour government, and they banned US nuclear warships from our harbors. And that destroyed the alliance with the United States. The military alliance was killed. And I fought that. And during that time, I had the chance to meet a New Zealand communist who had left the party and had actually been in Moscow when they planned New Zealand's legislation. Now, what he taught me was this: the small Marxist groups working with China, working with Russia, working with Cuba are able to use their influence and through churches, through unions, through mainstream political parties to basically pull the strings of much larger nations. When Obama was in power, when Biden is in power now, we are being run by communists right now, and the legislation that is being promoted is communist. And I applied this knowledge. I wrote books about it. I got invited to a lot of conferences in the United States. I met Judge Saul. We made a movie, Enemies Within, which is about the Marxist and Islamist infiltration of the Congress. And he got me to help him out with Enemies Within the Church. And I was more shocked about the Marxist infiltration of the evangelical churches than I was about the infiltration of the government. But I shouldn't be, because, the enemies of America know if you want to take America down, you have to get inside the culture. You have to get inside. Get inside the backbone of America, and the backbone of America is the church. So it's natural that they would go there. So that's why we did Enemies Within the Church. I've got a couple of books out now called Security Risk Senators, all about the Marxists in the US Senate, and I'm working on another one called House Un-Americans, and a profile about 100 American congressmen with their Marxist, Chinese, Cuban, Iranian, Russian ties, etc. So that's where I came from. I just followed the evidence, and this is where it's got me to.
So, Trevor, you people who are ignorant of Marxism And people who are ignorant of their tactics right now, if they've listened this far, think that you're the radical. Like, you're crazy.
Yeah.
Because they don't know what they teach, they don't know what they do. So can you give some insight into that?
Well, if we look around America right now, we see things like open borders. We see things like the radical LGBTQ movement that is creating havoc with our kids. We are seeing the gutting of the United States military. We're seeing wokeism and progressivism taking over our universities and stifling free speech. What we need to understand is these are all elements of the revolutionary movement trying to take America down. The gay movement is a Marxist movement. It was started by the Communist Party member Harry Hay. The Open Borders movement is a Marxist movement. It's there to flood the American conservative base with millions of new Democrats to bring this country down. You know, the gutting of the military is a Marxist movement to weaken the United States in preparation for conquest. Black Lives Matter is a communist Chinese operation burning cities all over America. But you have churches taking a knee to these people. You know, so what we call wokeism, what we hear about in the churches now, wokeism, that's Marxism. That is increasing people's awareness of class consciousness, of racial inequality, of LGBTQ oppression. That is Maoist Chinese communism. But it's in churches now. See, what people don't understand, they see all these separate phenomena, but what they don't understand is that they all have Marxist revolutionary roots. So to those who say there is no communism in America, it's like telling a fish telling you there's no water in the sea. You know, we're swimming in it. It is our culture now. You know, everything from Black Lives Matter to the LGBTQ movement, to the Open Borders movement, to the environmental movement, to the radical feminist movement, all of them are Marxist, all of them are revolutionary. They all mean to dethrone God, to destroy the US political system, and implement a new progressive socialist society, a tyranny on America. And we're in the right in the middle of it. We are 70% through the revolution right now.
So I can imagine some Christians right now watching this and saying, this world is not my home. Who cares if America goes Maoist? I'm just passing through. I'm a pilgrim, and this world can burn, but I'm going to go to heaven, and who cares? Why is that a wicked way to view this?
I think it's a great question. Look, I just saw Christianity obliterated in northern Iraq, right? Churches were burnt, people were slaughtered, tortured, beheaded, horrible, horrible stuff. I didn't see any of those Christians get raptured. I didn't see any of them spared a horrible, horrible fate. But American Christians think that they are going to get spared from what is coming. They think the persecution will mean that you have to go down from 2 cars to 2 cars from 3. You can only take 2 holidays in the Caribbean a year instead of 4. Look, we all through the Bible, the message is it is our duty to counter evil. It is our duty, not an option, not a maybe, not a, if it's not too inconvenient. It is our duty to counter evil at every opportunity. And if you don't counter evil, it's because you're a coward. And if you look at the book of Revelations, there's a list of people that get cast into the pit of hell.
Yep.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And the very first people in that list are not the idolaters or the murderers. It is the cowards. And why do the cowards go first? Because cowards have no faith. And if you've got no faith, you have no courage. Because courage depends on faith. So to say that, I say these people who say this, I say, well, your pastor tells you that we're just passing through, we're all going to go to heaven, and it doesn't really matter what happens. Well, so you're standing by your swimming pool with your pastor, and your 3-year-old daughter falls into the pool, and your pastor says, don't do anything, it's God's will. We're just passing through here. She'll go to heaven. What are you going to do? You're going to punch your pastor in the face and dive into the pool, or you're going to say, yes, that's right. This is God's will. She must drown. This is obviously what God wants. This is just the most lunatic argument I've ever heard.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we are, the whole Old Testament, both Testaments are full of people courageously standing against evil. From David versus Goliath, to the Gideon's army, to Jesus Christ who went into the temple and tipped over the things. It is all about courage, standing for what is right. And do you really think that God wants this country lost? You know, we got a constitution that comes out of the Bible.
Yep.
This country has done more to spread the gospel around the world than any other.
Yep.
Has saved more people from tyranny than any other. Has built more churches and hospitals and schools than any other. Has done more good in the world than any other, because it's based on biblical principles, and now it's about to be lost, and you have American Christians seriously telling you, well, we have no duty to help this. We have no duty to do anything about this. That is the biggest cowardly cop-out, completely unbiblical that I've ever seen. But millions of Christians will tell you this.
So, Trevor, you there's so many ways, there's so many questions I have for you. So you recently, you've been fighting communism, Marxism for a while now, but there something happened when making this enemies within the church with you spiritually. Do I have that right?
Yeah, I'd say I am much more spiritually focused now than I was when I started. That's absolutely correct. You know, I've had a lot of understanding, a lot of deepening, you know. I've been reading a lot more, everything from C.S. Lewis to whatever. You know, I'm on a spiritual journey, and that was spurred by making this movie.
And when I hear the you know, there's Marxism within the church, it makes me wonder why some churches will fight hard against Republican politics, conservative politics, and say that's allowing politics into the church. But Maoism, Marxism, communism in the church, well, that's just Christianity. Can you help us think through that?
Well, that's exactly right. You know, Christians shouldn't be too political. Well,
Right.
no, that just means you shouldn't be politically conservative.
That's
You
right.
should swim in politics as long as it's left-wing politics.
Yes.
But here's my argument too. We were given 3 institutions to govern ourselves. We were given the church, we're given the family, and we're given civil government. So civil government, despite the protestations of many, is a godly institution. If you don't believe that, read the Old Testament. It's all about civil government, wise kings, rulers, what happens to if you don't put a wall up around your city, as the Israelites found out. So if we are told to love God and thy neighbor as thyself, and your neighbor is starving and you do nothing to help, can you call yourself a good Christian? If your town is being flooded, the river's broken the stop banks, it's all disaster, and people are down there manning the pumps and putting up sandbags, but you sit at home and pray all day, can you really call yourself a good Christian? So when your country, that has a constitution inspired by the Bible, that has set people free and created so much bounty for millions, is threatened with disaster, and you believe you have zero responsibility for maintaining it or saving it, can you really call yourself a good Christian?
No.
No, it's not politics. It's civic responsibility.
It's morality.
If you have a responsibility to your church and your family, why do you not have a responsibility to your civil government, which is also a godly institution?
So you just said earlier that 70%, we're 70% through the revolution right now. And it's easier for people to say that who know about Marxist revolutions. They know, like, okay, this is 70% the way through. So what's the last 30% that you can expect, that we can expect to see?
Well, one of the big things is illegal immigration. There are probably 40 million illegal immigrants in the country right now. And I understand why they come here. They've been invited in, basically. Hillary Clinton promised that within 100 days of taking office, she was going to legalize every single one of them and give them citizenship and voting rights. Now, you look at most US elections, they're won or lost by 5 million votes or under, presidential elections. You give citizenship and voting rights to 40, 50 million illegal immigrants who will vote 90% Democrat. That's it. You have a one-party state in the country from then on forever. And they will come after the churches. The only reason they're not coming after the churches right now is because there's still opposition. They could still lose an election. They could still have to be restrained. But the Democratic Party has been taken over by communists, and the Republican Party has been colonized by wimps. So it takes one bad election, one more election, legalize a whole bunch of people, and that's the revolution. Then you'll start to see the persecution. When they have full power, when they can no longer be overturned, that's when the laws will come after the churches. They've already passed the Equality Act through the House. It just requires, if they get this, they can go, if they get the House again and pass that again, goes through the Senate, get signed off, that will destroy every conservative Christian church in the country, because that tells every Christian that LGBTQ rights come ahead of your Christian conscience. And if you do not kowtow to the Marxist LGBTQ agenda, we can come after you and shut down your churches and persecute you and go after your children, because you can't have racists and homophobes raising children, you see. So the youth and family services will start coming after Christian kids. That's already happening now. So we're on the edge of great persecution, and the only thing that's stopping it is that the left doesn't have full power yet. It's still got a little bit of pushing to do. They've got to legalize those illegal immigrants. They've got to try and take away the guns as much as they can, try and clamp down on rights. So we're just about there. We're hanging on by a thread right now. And the persecution, when it comes, will be just as bad as in China or Cuba or Vietnam or Laos or Cambodia as any other country that the communists take over. There will be mass slaughter of opposition in this country.
And the reason that we should be worried about that is because it's happened in the past.
Yeah, it's look. The people who run America now are the people who marched for the Viet Cong in the 70s. They supported the Nicaraguan Sandinistas in the 80s, and they loved Fidel Castro, who murdered people and persecuted Christians. And now they're running the Democratic Party. They're running Hollywood. They're running most of the TV studios. They're running the education department. They're running all of the unions. They have almost complete power in the country, and they hate Christians. Woke Christians, they'll be tolerated a bit longer, but real Christians are hated by the left, absolutely hated. People who can advocate for post-birth abortion and refuse to invoke God at their national convention are not going to have any mercy on conservative Christians who think they can hide away in their little hut out in Montana or Wyoming or whatever. They want to obliterate Christianity from the face of America, as they have done in every other country they've taken over.
So Marxism has infiltrated all of these major areas of cultural influence, but when it comes to the church, the church today, in general, is Marxism seeking to infiltrate the church today as well?
Yeah, look, and this is what surprised me a little bit, because for many years, the very first Communist Party front in America, back in about 1907, really it was called the Methodist Federation for Social Action. So it was a Christian organization, and so the Marxists infiltrated the mainstream Protestant churches starting in the 1920s. They put lots of their people into the churches. They put lots of people into the Bible colleges and religious institutions starting in the 20s, because they knew that if they could take the church, they could alter the direction of American society. Because Andrew Breitbart used to say, politics is downstream from culture. The culture shapes the politics, but the culture is downstream from the church. The church shapes the culture shapes the politics. So they knew they had to get the churches. And by the 1970s, they had pretty much all of the mainstream churches under control. They were all going liberal. They were all, just abandoning their real Christian beliefs. But they didn't have the evangelicals. And the evangelicals are these crazy people who went out and voted for Ronald Reagan and supported Israel. And then they went out and voted for Donald Trump and supported him as well, and put their agenda back quite a long way. So starting about 2005 with the Gospel Coalition, Tim Keller and his friends, there was a real push to bring Marxism, wokeism into the churches. And they worked with the Ethics Commission of the Southern Baptists under Russell Moore and people like that to bring the wokeism and the Marxism into the Baptists as well. And this is purely secular. This is political. They know if they can get hold of the minds of millions of American Christians and steer them to the left politically, that's the end of any conservative movement in America. That's a socialist state going forward. And then you can deal with the Christians how you really want to deal with them. But first, let's use their numbers to work for the left. Let's talk about social justice, and Jesus was a refugee, and the biggest sin is racism, and we're all got white privilege, and let's welcome millions of refugees across the border, because that's what Jesus would do. That's the ad they played at the Super Bowl, the last Super Bowl, pushing this stuff. All of it's Marxism. All of it is complete wokeist Marxism. And it is all through the Bible colleges. It's all through the seminaries. The Bible colleges of America now are where the secular universities were 20 years ago. 20 years ago, they were about 70% Marxist. Well, that's where the Bible colleges are today. They are woke as woke can be. And the young pastors that are coming out are supporting Bernie Sanders and progressivism. They're way more worried about global warming than they are about sub-global warming. They have adulterated the Bible in all sorts of ways, dumbed it down, just abandoned all pretext of law. It's all about love now, nothing about law. And so this is altering American Christianity and moving it to the left. The last bastion of America is now going to the left. And that will affect everybody, whether you're Christian, Jewish, Hindu, or whatever you are, atheist or whatever. If the Christian churches go, our freedom goes with it.
Now, on the one hand, it just seems like these people are, they just love their cause. They love Marxism. They're true believers. But is there a more nefarious underbelly to this? Is there something else going on underneath all this?
Well, Paul Kengel, my friend, is a professor at Grove City College, wrote a great book, Marx and Satan. And what he said is what we all know, is that ultimately Marxism is satanic. It's the old battle between God and the devil, God gave us certain laws to live. He gave us hierarchies, man, wife, parent, child, employer, employee, God, man, nature. And we gave us these basic laws to live by. Now the devil has always been trying to overturn and undermine those laws, trying to destroy everything that God gave us. Now, if you were Satan, wouldn't you want to get inside God's church? Wouldn't that be the ultimate insult to God? If you could get God's people, Christians, doing your work, wouldn't that be the ultimate trick? And so Marxism is essentially satanic. It's all about, what is revolution? Revolution is overturning the natural hierarchies of life. And so revolution is feminism. You destroy the family. Man is no longer the head of the household. The kids don't listen to the parents. You make nature more important than man. You rot civil government. You make kids the rulers of their teachers. You destroy all discipline. You make criminals the rulers of many communities. All of that is part of the revolutionary process, the overturning of God's hierarchies and institutions. And so, ultimately, what we're looking here is a battle between God and Satan. The ultimate objective of Satan is to overturn God in heaven. He will never succeed, but we're letting him do a lot of unnecessary damage by allowing him into the churches, by allowing his ideas into the churches, because this is discrediting Christianity, and it's turning people in the wrong direction, and it's undermining society, and it's turning Christians into cowards, faithless cowards. We're seeing a great apostasy. I can never say that word right. And this is Satan. Marxism, materialistic Marxism in the churches is satanic. And you have Christians adopting these principles with no understanding of the basis of them. They think they're doing good, but they're destroying their own church and destroying their own families and destroying their own country. Well, isn't the devil the prince of lies? Isn't it all about deception?
Yep.
Well, aren't Christians supposed to be discerning?
Especially Christian pastors are supposed to be discerning. If the flock isn't, the pastors should be. But it seems like the pastors are some of the easiest to the biggest suckers when it comes to Marxism.
Well, look, I had a great friend. His name was Herb Romerstein, and he was a young communist, the youngest Communist Party member in America. But he left communism. He fought in the Marines in the Korean War against the communists, and he became the U.S. Senate's leading authority on communism. He would come and testify whenever there was a hearing. He knew every communist in the country. He's a walking encyclopedia. And he said to me, Trevor, he said, in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, the biggest suckers for communist fronts, communist causes, communist petitions were Protestant clergymen. The biggest suckers, because this Marxism has been in their churches for a long time, and they've been indoctrinated, and they just want to believe the best of people. But this is the thing. This is what I say. How do you tell if you have a faithful pastor? He'll be a courageous pastor. He will be standing against evil. He will be leading his flock. Because, a pastor, the analogy is a shepherd. A shepherd has a crook.
Right.
The crook is to discipline the sheep, keep the sheep in line, and beat the darn wolves away.
Yep.
Well, you can't tell me there's no wolves out there coming after our kids right now. You can't tell me there's no wolves in society trying to destroy the churches. Any pastor who's not standing against that is not a real pastor, because he
Amen.
is showing no courage, which means his faith is very wishy-washy, to put it mildly. Got some deep misunderstandings about what's going on. A pastor should be a leader, the most courageous man in the church. The Revolutionary War of America was led by pastors.
Black Robe Regiment.
Virtually all of the revolutionary commanders were pastors.
Amen.
Something like 98% were pastors. As you said, the black robed regiments, they had a Bible in one hand and they had a long rifle in the other, because they were fighting for their religious liberty. They knew that King George was going to impose a state church on America. And most of them had fled Europe to get away from the state churches of Europe, where they were persecuted if they didn't believe the right system, and came to America to establish religious liberty. And they were real pastors. They were willing to fight for their beliefs and protect their people. Well, if you're a pastor today and you're not willing to do that, why are you a pastor? You should be running a social club.
But Trevor, what about Romans 13? I mean, aren't we just supposed to do whatever the government tells us to do because that's what faithfulness is?
Lawful. We are supposed to obey lawful government. Amen. And if you look at America, who is the highest political authority in America?
The people.
It is the people. The people are sovereign in America.
Amen.
You're supposed to stand by the will of the people. You're not supposed to stand by some bureaucrat who has a higher position. Sure, we should respect authority, but if authority is ungodly or unlawful, you have a duty to stand against it. You know, why did we get World War II? Because the German Christians, who are the only group in Germany who had the numbers and the moral authority to stop Hitler, misinterpreted Romans 13 and thought, no, Hitler said, you look after the souls of men, I'll look after Germany. Right. And what did that lead to? And who had to sort it out? Young American boys, mainly Christian, left their farms in Nebraska and Iowa and New Jersey and California and picked up guns and charged Nazi machine guns on the beaches of Normandy.
So, Trevor, I've a ton more questions. Is America special, this country that we have? Is there something special about this country, or should Christians just be kind of like, just let it go?
Yeah, this is the big argument. We're no better than anyone else. America was built on slavery. America ripped off the third world. We're a horrible country. Look, this country, I think, under more than any other, has a covenant with God. I really believe that. You know, the American Revolution should never have happened. You had a bunch of farmers and pastors and blacksmiths with squirrel rifles took on the world's greatest military empire. How insane was that? All because they believed that man's rights come from God, not from the government. And they were beaten in virtually every battle. They were slaughtered. They were outnumbered. They were almost defeated. And George Washington got down on his knees at Valley Forge, and then he went to led that what was left of his army to take out the British in a surprise attack at Yorktown, turned the course of the war. Look, there were many miracles in that war. The famous fog that came down on New York Harbor just at the right time to allow George Washington's army to escape. The bullets that went through his tunic and through his hat, but never through him. I think America is great because America was the first country in the world to be founded on the principle that man's rights come from God, not the government. And you have a constitution and representative government that is designed to protect those rights. You know, representative government came out of Mosaic law. You know, when Moses was leading the people through the desert, he had all these people coming to him, moaning and complaining and suggesting. He said, go, driving him nuts. He said, go amongst yourself and choose representatives and come back to me. Yeah, I think absolutely America is a country, a special country. I think, you know, this country was founded in providence. I think it's been helped with God's providence ever since. And I think it is our duty to save it. And I think if enough people stand up to save it, I think God might just say, yeah, I think this country is worth saving. Because we're not going to get out of this without some providence. But we got to do our stuff too. just like your founding fathers did.
So is there any way that biblical Christianity is compatible with Marxism?
None whatsoever.
That's
Marxism is based on envy. Envy. You've got more than me, so I should have your stuff. Is that in any way a Christian principle?
No.
You're supposed to covet your neighbor's stuff. Is that right? It's really, Marxism is about Abel. It's rebellion. Cain. Sorry, it's
Okay.
Cain. It's rebellion. It's jealousy. It's ego. It's all about power. It's atheistic. It's all about power and control. It's not about sharing. It's not about voluntary charity. It's not about real human benevolence. It is making the state God, making the government God. And none of us, we should all know by now, we shouldn't trust the government. And we certainly shouldn't trust the government to play God and control every aspect of our lives. There is no overlap between the real tenets of Marxism or communism and Christianity. They are like night and day, oil and water. They cannot mix. And the only way you can get them to mix is by lying about the real nature of Marxism. Dissimulation, lying, and, Jesus was a socialist. Jesus welcomed the poor. Jesus was a refugee. They don't tell you verses like that. They who do not work shall not eat.
Right.
The Ten Commandments is very clear on private property. You don't covet your neighbor's stuff. You get your own.
Yep.
You work. And so Marxism is just all about jealousy, all about greed. It's all a zero-sum game. Well, if you've got more stuff, that means I got less. And we got to even this up. A Christian worldview is we're living in a bounteous world, bounteous universe. We can apply our minds, we can apply our principles, we can build bounty and prosperity for everyone who's willing to work for it. It's a very benevolent system. Marxism is completely malevolent from top to bottom.
Yeah, I don't remember where I heard it, but what keeps ringing in my ears as I listen to what you're saying is this line where it says, "Never has a people with so much to lose done so little to protect it." And that's what I'm seeing, not just in America, but in the evangelical church, especially in the Reformed evangelical church. We're fighting about nothing right now, while the enemy just continues every day to make further steps into tyranny into our country, and it's driving me mad. And so I'm very grateful for what you're saying.
Well, that's right. You can dance on all this pre-trib, post-trib, all these little arguments that people get into. It's irrelevant. I listened to Dennis Prager a while back, and he said, people always ask, give me some hope. And he says, no, we shouldn't be even thinking about hope. All we should wake up every morning and think of, what is God's will? How do I do God's will today? How do I do that? Is God's will that you should be fighting with your neighbor about minor doctrinal points, or should be uniting with your neighbor to save Christianity and save this country from destruction and save your children's futures and their lives? If people look at the big picture and look at eternity rather than their little principalities, their little ego trips, they wouldn't be arguing any of this stuff. When you're in a foxhole and the Japanese army's about to invade you, you're going to sit there talking about the tribulation, or whether it's post-trib or whatever. Are you really going to, you want to survive. You want to live. And we're at the point right now, anybody who doesn't understand that American freedom and the very existence of this country isn't threatened, they are not living in the real world. And here's a little thing that I say. We got to face reality. We all live in La La Land. We're all going to get raptured tomorrow, so it doesn't really matter. As I said, the people in Syria and Iraq didn't get raptured; they got slaughtered.
Yeah.
But American Christians who voted for Barack Obama or allowed Barack Obama to come to power, who then allowed ISIS to come to power to destroy all those people, they're all going to get raptured, right? They're all going to get saved. They're all going to be spared the persecution because somehow God loves American Christians more than he loves Iraqi Christians, right? We're going to face reality. If we face reality, that is proof of faith, because facing the reality of the situation takes courage. And where does your courage come from? Your courage comes from your faith. So when people actually face the reality of our situation, that is proof to God that we have faith, that we actually look at something bigger. We can see the bigger picture here. And maybe God will think at that point, maybe this country is worth saving. But when people spend all their time ignoring the disasters that are looming and debating minor little points and trashing each other on Facebook and trying to prove that their particular interpretation of a particular verse is more accurate than somebody else's, they're completely ignoring God's will. Because God's will is to fight evil, not each other.
Amen. I've got two more questions quickly. Number one, in your study of Marxism, can you look back and see pastors who stood against it, who were brave, who did fight tyranny? And what are some of the ways that can encourage the American church?
Well, you look at people like Pastor Wurmbrand in Romania. He was in prison for something like 16 years by the communists and continually told to renounce his faith to be released. He was tortured all that time, never, ever gave up. There are many instances in communist countries of priests and pastors being arrested, being jailed, being executed, and they've always told you renounce your faith and you'll be okay. You can live. Well, they didn't. So many pastors in this country, the famous, Bishop Sheen, the famous Catholic leader, railed against communism for many years. Everybody from Billy Graham in his early days to Billy James Hargest and many others. The leadership of the anti-communist movement in America was always the churches, as you say, because they had the most to lose. They understood that Marxism was antithetical to Christianity, Marxism was satanic, and they were not going to kowtow to it. But unfortunately, as we've got softer and weaker and more prosperous in this country, we've got a lot more complacent, and as our education has got much less rigorous, we've got a lot more gullible, and we start to believe these arguments because they're always couched in, look, nobody gets up in the morning and says, I want to go to hell. I really, really, really want to go to hell. I think hell is the place to be. It's always through a few compromises here, accepting a lie here, doing something wrong there. Well, that's how the Marxists have got into the church. They've made a beachhead in the church by playing on pastors' gullibility and their lack of discernment, sold these pastors that Jesus was a socialist, that Jesus was a refugee, that Jesus was an immigrant, that we must love our LGBTQ brothers and not try to save them from their sin, but condone their sin. So, yeah, it's for 2,000 years, the pastors have led the church and have been brave. Really, I would say it's in the last 50 years that the pastors have got more cowardly and have withdrawn from the leadership of society. For 2,000 years, the politicians look to the church for moral guidance. The people look to the church for moral guidance. They may have been hypocrites. They may have disobeyed, but at least they recognized the church for the moral leadership that it provided. Could you say the church provides moral leadership in this nation today to our politicians and our populace?
No.
Did you say our church is leading as it's supposed to be leading?
No.
What are we seeing as a consequence of it?
The Marxist takeover of our country.
Yeah, we're seeing a vacuum, aren't we?
Mm-hmm.
Like when the church is strong and the church is leading, the families are usually sound, families are good, and the civil government stays within its boundaries. When the church abandons its leadership role, the families fall into chaos and the government gets out of control. And that's where we are right now.
Well, Trevor, thank you for your time. I could talk to you for hours. I really appreciate the.
I enjoy it. I love it, debating these things.
Thank you. Is there anywhere where people can find out more about you if they want to read your books, if they want to watch your presentations?
Yeah, look, go to trevorloudon.com. So that's Loudon is Loudon, trevorloudon.com. You've got to see the movie Enemies Within the Church. You can get it through my website. And I've got 2 new books out, Security Risk Senators Parts 1 and Part 2. I profile the communist backgrounds of 30 currently serving US senators. Some people that you see on TV every night, maybe people you've even voted for unwittingly. So trevorloudon.com.
Well, thank you, everybody, for joining Trevor and I here at the Redeeming Truth podcast. I pray that this was helpful. I pray it was challenging. So if you enjoyed it, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you didn't enjoy it, please, thanks for watching. And everybody, please leave your comments below. We'd love to see what you think. Have a great time, and we'll see you next time on the Redeeming Truth podcast.